When a quiet man's family land is secretly built over by a greedy developer, a forgotten 100-year-old trust becomes the ultimate trap, turning a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground for justice and legacy. Ethan Hale was not the kind of man who liked crowds and noise or city life. He lived alone in an old wooden house, surrounded by trees and wild bushes on the edge of a small Texas town. His house was not modern or fancy. It had creaky wooden floors, dusty windows, and a tin roof that made loud noises when it rained. But Ethan didn't mind. This was home for him. It had always been home for his family for many generations. Some people in the town didn't even know his name, and those who did thought he was just a quiet man who liked to stay away from everyone. But Ethan carried a secret of family history that most had forgotten. His land stretched far beyond what people could see. Trees, fields, small ponds, and old fences covered about 80 acres of untouched land. Long ago, this land had been part of a much larger property owned by his great-great-grandfather, Samuel Hale. Samuel was a tough, clever man who came to Texas with nothing but a dream and a shovel. He worked hard, bought land bit by bit, and by the early 1900s, he owned thousands of acres. Over the years, much of that land was sold or taken. But one piece remained, a strange 80-acre patch that Samuel had locked away inside something called a trust. The trust was a legal document. It's like a contract, but more complicated. It said that the land could never be sold, built on, or given away unless a blood relative of Samuel Hale gave written permission. Not just any permission, it had to be signed, sealed, and approved by a court. Samuel didn't trust banks, developers, or greedy politicians. He believed that one day someone would try to steal what didn't belong to them, so he created this trap, this legal wall, to protect what was his. Ethan knew about the trust, but he never gave it much thought. His father had told him stories about it when he was young, but they sounded like fairy tales. "This land is yours, son," his father once said while they stood under a large oak tree. "But it's more than just dirt and grass. It's a promise, a shield. Your great-great-grandfather made sure of that." Back then, Ethan didn't understand what that really meant. As he grew older, he became more curious. He read the old papers, saw the strange legal language, and kept them in a metal box under his bed. Still, no one had ever tried to take the land, so he let it be. Life was peaceful for Ethan. He woke up with the sun, fed the chickens he kept in the backyard, and walked through the woods with his dog, Max. Sometimes he would sit on the porch and watch deer walk by. Sometimes he would fix fences or check the old well that his grandfather had dug by hand. Didn't have many friends, but he wasn't lonely. The land was enough. It gave him peace, fresh air, and a connection to something much older than himself. While other people chased money, jobs, or city dreams, Ethan chose stillness. But around him, the world was changing fast. The nearby town had grown into a small city. New stores, schools, and shopping centers were built every year. What used to be empty fields were now filled with houses and parking lots. Developers were hungry. They wanted land, any land. And Ethan's land was like a golden treasure chest just sitting there, waiting to be opened. But no one knew it still belonged to him. Records were old, dusty, and buried deep in the county archives. To the outside world, it looked like the land had no clear owner. It looked forgotten. But it wasn't one day Ethan was sitting on the porch drinking sweet tea when he saw a white SUV stop near his driveway. Two men in suits stepped out. They smiled and waved. Ethan didn't wave back. He just watched. One of the men approached and said, "Good afternoon, sir." "Beautiful place you've got here, Ethan." Nodded slowly. "Thank you," he replied, not smiling. The man introduced himself as a representative from a development company. He said they were building a new community nearby and wanted to know if Ethan would be willing to sell his land. "You'd be surprised what it's worth," the man said. "We're offering good money." Ethan didn't even think about it. "Not for sale," he said firmly. The man tried to push a little, saying it would benefit the town, bring jobs, and increase property value. But Ethan repeated, "Not for sale," and turned away. The man left, but that wasn't the end. Over the next few weeks, Ethan saw more. People driving by. Some took pictures. Others flew drones over his land. He started to feel uneasy. Something was happening. One day he drove to the county records office to make sure everything was still in order. That's when he learned the shocking truth. The woman behind the counter looked confused. When she searched for the Hale property, "There's no recent activity," she said, "but this land has been flagged for development." Ethan's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" She explained that a developer had already bought the land and received permits to build houses. "They said it was unclaimed," she added. Ethan shook his head. "It's not unclaimed," he said. "It's mine." He drove home in a panic, pulled out the old trust papers, and started reading them carefully. His hands trembled as he flipped through the yellowed pages. There it was, clear as day. Samuel Hale's signature. The rules, the conditions. No one could build without a descendant's permission. Ethan was that descendant. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat at his old desk with a single lamp burning and reread everything again. Realized something terrifying. Someone had made a huge mistake. The land was never sold. It was never abandoned. It was protected by a legal trap that no one had noticed in over 100 years. And now someone had triggered it. The next morning, Ethan heard the sound of machines in the distance. He walked toward the back of his land and saw giant cranes, cement mixers, and workers moving around like ants. A huge fence had been put up. Roads were being paved. It wasn't just a few houses. They were building an entire neighborhood. And they had no idea it was all sitting on land they didn't own. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't rush to stop them, just stood there, watching in silence, like a storm waiting to break. He knew that something big was about to happen. And he also knew one thing for sure. His great-great-grandfather's trap was still alive. Buried inside dusty paper and strange legal words, but strong enough to shake everything. This was no longer just land. This was a ticking bomb. And soon, everyone was going to hear it go off. Ethan Hale's peaceful life had started to change slowly at first, like a breeze before a storm. One morning, while feeding his chickens, he heard the low rumble of engines from a distance. It was unusual. Normally, the only sounds on his land were chirping birds, rustling trees, and maybe the occasional barking of his old dog Max. But now, the noise was louder, steadier. He walked to the edge of his property and saw something adust, clouds rising, machines moving in the distance, and trucks coming in one after another. At first he thought it might be road repair. After all, the county had been improving infrastructure around town lately, but the trucks didn't stop. They kept coming day after day. Soon, huge machines, piered cranes, bulldozers, excavators. Workers in neon vests and hard hats moved quickly and efficiently. They didn't come near Ethan's house or the front of his land, but they were definitely close. Very close. They were clearing trees, flattening earth, and laying down foundations. Strange, he thought. He hadn't seen any public notices, no letters, no signs, and this wasn't some small project. This was big. A few days later, he saw something that confirmed his suspicion. A giant wooden board nailed into the ground near the main road. It read, "Coming soon, Willow Creek Estates, a new gated community by Horizon Development Group. Luxury living begins here." Ethan froze as he read the sign. He had never heard of Willow Creek Estates. Horizon Development Group meant nothing to him. But one thing was very clear. Someone was building a brand new neighborhood right next to, or possibly even inside, his land, and they hadn't said a single word to him. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with his old maps, papers, and the trust documents that his father and grandfather had passed down. He double-checked the property lines. He highlighted the borders. Everything he looked at told him the same thing. Construction was happening on the very land that was protected by the Hale family trust. Confused and angry, Ethan decided to visit the county office again. This time, he was more direct. He asked for the land development files and any recent property transactions involving the land near his. The woman at the desk was polite but seemed unsure. After typing and searching for a while, she found some documents and printed them out. Ethan looked at the pages. His hands trembled. His land was listed under a new name, Horizon Development Group. The papers showed a purchase, permit for housing development, and approval from the zoning board. Everything looked legal and official. But Ethan had never sold anything. He had never even spoken to these people. And yet the papers said the land had been purchased. He looked up at the woman and said quietly, "There's been a mistake. This land is under a trust. My family has owned it for over 100 years. I never sold it." She looked at him, confused. "Well, according to these records, sir, the land was considered unclaimed for over 20 years. It was filed as inactive. No taxes due, no recent ownership verification. Horizon bought it through an abandoned property claim." Ethan's head was spinning. Abandoned? His land was anything but abandoned. He had lived there his whole life. He mowed the grass, walked the land, maintained the fences. How could they think it was unclaimed? He took the documents home and started investigating on his own. He went through every paper in the trust file. The Hale family trust was more than just a simple document. It had pages of legal language, conditions, and protections. The key clause said that the land could never be transferred or developed without permission from a direct descendant, and that meant Ethan. And Ethan had never given permission. As he read deeper, he noticed something strange. There was a date, July 7th, 1923, next to a handwritten note from Samuel Hale himself. It said, "To my future bloodline, if this land is ever disturbed without your consent, you hold the power to take back what is yours. The law is on your side." Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. It wasn't just a document. It was a message, a warning, a weapon, if needed. Back outside, construction was moving fast. Roads were being laid, sidewalks poured, lampposts installed. Ethan could now see the outlines of cul-de-sacs and driveways. There were already wooden frames, going up to story homes, all identical, lined up in rows like toy houses. A sales office appeared overnight. Then came the model homes. Colorful banners flew in the wind saying, "Homes starting at $499,000. Reserve yours today." Ethan stood at the edge of his land, watching all of this unfold. He knew that 99% of the people involved had no idea what they were doing. The workers were just following orders. The buyers were excited families with kids and dreams. But none of them knew that the ground they were building on didn't belong to Horizon. It still legally belonged to the Hale family, and always had. Didn't want to panic, but he also couldn't sit quietly anymore. He called a lawyer. It's not just any lawyer, someone who understood property law and historical trusts. The lawyer, a woman named Claire, was surprised when Ethan explained the situation, but when she saw the trust document, her eyes widened. She had never seen anything like it. She said, "This is incredible and very real. If this document is valid, then they've built an entire neighborhood on land they don't own."
Out.
Nodded slowly. "That's what I was afraid of." Claire began her own investigation. She looked through the Horizon purchase records, the title transfers, the zoning approvals, and just like Ethan feared, there was a major gap. Horizon had bought the land based on a mistake in the county records. Someone years ago had failed to update the trust's ownership status. Because no taxes were due thanks to the way the trust was structured, the county thought the land was inactive. So Horizon swooped in and bought it cheap, believing it was legally available. But it was. Had sold dozens of homes. More were under contract. People were moving in. Kids were playing in front yards. Families were planting flowers. The neighborhood even had its own security gate, a playground, and a pool under construction. It looked like a dream for those who had just bought homes there. But Ethan saw it differently. To him, it looked like a dream built on a lie. He wondered if he should just walk away, let it be, maybe accept a payoff and move on. But every time he thought about it, he remembered his father's voice. This land is not just land, it's legacy. And the more he thought, the angrier he got. These people didn't ask. They didn't check. They just assumed. They took one evening, he drove slowly through the new neighborhood, just to see it for himself. The streets had fancy names like Willow Bend Lane and Cedar Crest Way. Every house looked shiny and new. Some families waved as he passed. One kid riding a bike smiled at him. Ethan didn't wave back. It was too deep in thought. He wasn't angry at the families, but at the system that had allowed this to happen. When he got back home, he sat on the porch as the sun set behind the trees. Max lay beside him, tail gently wagging. Ethan looked out at the rows of houses, rising like weeds on a field that had once been wild, untouched, and full of memories. He thought of his grandfather walking these same fields. He thought of his father hammering fence posts under the hot Texas sun. And he thought of the paper he now held in his hands, an old, forgotten trust that might just change everything. Ethan knew what he had to do next. He had to make a decision not just for himself, but for the generations who had come before him and the generations who might come after.
Ow.
The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Ethan Hales sat at his kitchen table with the trust papers spread out in front of him like a battlefield map. It was late at night. The only light in the room came from an old desk lamp, and the rest of the house was silent, except for the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional bark of Max, his loyal dog who sensed his owner's tension. The papers looked old, with faded ink and yellowing edges, but every word still held power. Ethan now understood that this wasn't just some family keepsake. It was a shield, a legal weapon that could shake the very ground under the new neighborhood. That had been built without his permission. The houses kept multiplying like mushrooms after rain. By now, over 100 homes had been completed. Families were moving in, kids riding bikes, people decorating their porches, streetlights were lit at night, and a neighborhood sign stood proudly at the gated entrance. Welcome to Willow Creek Estates, a Horizon living community. Ethan watched it all unfold like a dream he couldn't stop. Only it wasn't a dream. It was a storm building quietly, and no one knew they were standing in its path. Ethan's lawyer, Claire, had already begun making calls. She had never seen a trust this old, this detailed, and this cleverly written. The more she read it, the more surprised she became. It wasn't just about ownership. It had rules, very old, very specific rules. One part of the trust stood out above all, a clause written in formal language from the 1920s. Claire read it aloud over the phone. If any entity, corporation, or individual attempts to develop, construct, or profit from this land without proper written permission from a living, blood-related descendant of Samuel Hale, then full rights to said land and all developments upon it shall revert back to the trust heir, and all construction shall be considered unlawful and trespassing. Claire paused. Ethan, she said slowly, if this clause is still legally valid, and it looks like it is, then you're not just the rightful owner of the land. You're also the rightful owner of everything that's been built on it. Ethan's hands went cold, you mean? The houses? Yes, every house, every street, even the sales office and the community park. It sounded crazy, unreal, like something out of a movie. But Claire wasn't joking. The trust had been written like a trapped hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to cross the line. And now, that line had been crossed. Claire sent letters to the county office and to Horizon Development Group, formally claiming ownership and citing the trust documents. At first, no one took it seriously. Horizon ignored the letter. County passed it to their legal department. Weeks passed and construction didn't stop. In fact, Horizon began advertising even more aggressively. Their website showed smiling families, drone footage of the new homes, and promises of peaceful, secure living. Then Claire filed a formal lawsuit. The legal battle had begun. Within a week, Horizon's lawyers responded. They were confident. They called the trust outdated, irrelevant, and unenforceable. But Claire was ready. She had already spoken to experts in land trusts, old property laws, and historical ownership. And every expert said the same thing. If the trust was real, and if Ethan could prove his bloodline, which he could then, Horizon was in serious trouble. Horizon's CEO, a man named Richard Kellerman, tried to settle things quietly. He offered Ethan a large sum of money, a few $1,000,000, to walk away and let the development continue. Ethan refused without even blinking. Then they tried again, doubling the offer. Again, Ethan said no. This wasn't about money. This was about respect, legacy, and justice. The land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was his family's history. And now, strangers were living on it like they owned the place. Once the news broke, it spread fast. A local news station picked up the story first. "Developer builds 156 homes on land they don't own," the headline read. Then came national coverage. Reporters showed up outside Ethan's gate, trying to get interviews. Some people called him a hero, standing up to a greedy corporation. Others called him a troublemaker, a man trying to take homes from innocent families. Ethan didn't say much. He let Claire do the talking, but deep down, he was torn. He didn't hate the families living in the homes. He hated the system that allowed all of this to happen without even asking him. He hated the way Horizon had cut corners, ignored laws, and assumed no one would notice. Inside the courtroom, things heated up. Horizon's lawyers argued that the trust was invalid because it hadn't been updated in years. Claire countered that the trust was created specifically to stay untouched. Strength was in how little it had changed. They argued that Ethan had abandoned the land. Claire showed pictures, maintenance records, and even old videos of Ethan living there for decades. They said Ethan was just trying to make money. Claire read the trust clause again and again, proving it was Samuel Hale, not Ethan, who had set the trap long ago. Then came the most important moment of all the day. Ethan stood in front of the judge and told his story. He talked about growing up on the land, learning from his father how to fix fences and care for the soil. He talked about the stories his grandfather told him about Samuel Hale, a man who didn't trust the government or big companies. He shared how he found the trust papers in an old metal box under the floorboards. He talked about the day he saw the construction trucks and knew something was wrong. The courtroom was silent. Even Horizon's lawyers were still. Then the judge asked Ethan one question. "Do you believe your great-great-grandfather intended to protect this land for his future family?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. That's what he wanted. And I am that family." After weeks of hearings, document reviews, expert testimony, and media pressure, the judge made a temporary ruling. Construction had to stop immediately. Horizon could not sell or build anything else until the matter was fully resolved. It was like hitting the brakes on a speeding train. Panic spread quickly. Homeowners started asking questions. Are we going to lose our homes? Is this man really the owner? Why didn't the HOA tell us? Lawsuits started flying. In every direction, homeowners sued Horizon for selling them homes without proper ownership rights. Horizon sued the county for allowing the sale. The HOA sued Horizon. It was a legal disaster. At the center of it all was a quiet man who just wanted his land back. Reporters chased Ethan's truck down the street. News vans parked outside his gate. Social media was filled with opinions, some calling him a villain, others calling him a genius. Memes appeared online. One showed Ethan wearing a cowboy hat with the words, "Built on my land? Not so fast." Another said, "When Grandpa leaves you land in a legal time bomb." Ethan ignored it all. He stayed focused. He didn't want fame or revenge. He just wanted what was fair. His family had followed the rules. Horizon hadn't, and now they were paying the price. Behind the scenes, Claire uncovered even more damning details. Horizon had been warned about. Unclear ownership, but pushed forward anyway. They believed that Ethan, if he existed at all, wouldn't have the money or the knowledge to fight back. They gambled and lost. By now, Horizon's stock value had dropped. Investors were angry. The CEO was under investigation for fraud. And Ethan, who once lived quietly among trees and birds, had become the man who stopped a neighborhood with a 100-year-old piece of paper. One day, while walking his land with Claire, Ethan stopped near the edge of a newly paved road that hadn't been named yet. He looked at the empty houses, the fresh grass, the swing sets, and said they thought this was just dirt, but it was a promise. Claire smiled. Well, now they know, but it wasn't over yet. The biggest surprise was still to come. Something hidden deep in the trust papers, something even Horizon hadn't seen. Final trap set by Samuel Hale waiting to explode, and Ethan was ready. Ethan Hale's quiet life had now turned into something he'd never imagined. The land he once walked alone every day had become the center of a massive legal and emotional storm. The news had reached every corner of the country. Everyone was talking about the man who owned the land under 156 newly built homes and the people living in those homes. Had no idea their dream life was sitting on shaky ground. The once peaceful neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates was now drowning in confusion, fear, and anger. Ethan had not caused the problem, but he was at the heart of it. Horizon Development had built houses, parks, streets, and sidewalks without knowing that the land still legally belonged to the Hale Family Trust, and now Ethan had activated that trust. What shocked people the most was the trust's strict clause. It said that if anyone tried to use the land without written permission from a blood relative of Samuel Hale, everything built on it would legally go back to the rightful heir. In this case, Ethan, the homeowners who had bought houses, with their life savings, started to panic. Some had just moved in. Others had only just unpacked their furniture. Many had children enrolled in local schools. Their perfect new life had now become a nightmare. Some people cried. Others got angry. A few started knocking on Ethan's door, demanding answers. But he couldn't open the door to everyone. So many people. So many questions. Most of them blamed him, thinking he was trying to take their homes away. But Ethan wasn't the enemy. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't lied. He hadn't hidden anything. It was the developers who ignored the old records and legal warnings. It was Horizon who rushed into construction without confirming proper ownership. And now, everyone was paying the price. Ethan stayed calm on the outside, but inside, his heart was heavy. He watched the neighborhood from a distance, standing on his porch, seeing new houses filled with lights, laughter, and now confusion. He felt for the families. He truly did. He remembered what his lawyer Claire told him again and again. You're not the villain. The system failed, not you. But the world outside didn't see it that way. Protesters started appearing outside his property. Some held signs like "Let families stay" and "Stop the land grab." A few were polite, just asking for a solution. Others were angry, shouting insults, calling him greedy. News vans came daily, trying to catch him on camera. Some channels painted him as a wise man who outsmarted the system. Others painted him as a cruel landowner, kicking innocent people out of their homes. The truth was far more complicated behind all of this chaos. Legal pressure was building. Horizon's company was drowning in lawsuits. The county was being blamed too for letting the land be listed as abandoned without confirming facts. Horizon's CEO, Richard Kellerman, went on TV trying to calm the storm. He said they were working with the landowner to reach a peaceful solution. But it wasn't true. Private, they were still trying to fight Ethan, using every trick. In the book, it sent private investigators to dig into his past, looking for anything they could use. It offered more money than tried threats. None of it worked. Claire handled most of the communication. She was calm, smart, and unshakable. She filed more legal documents, proved Ethan's right to the land again and again. But the pressure was growing. It's not just from the developers, but now from hundreds of homeowners who were scared of losing everything. Some even formed a group to fight back. They hired lawyers too, but their real anger wasn't with Ethan, it was with Horizon. Still in their pain and confusion, they needed someone to blame. And Ethan was the easiest target. Then, one day something unexpected happened. A young woman named Rachel knocked on Ethan's door. She was holding a child in her arms and had tears in her eyes. "Not here to fight. I just want to understand. I moved into that house 3 weeks ago. My husband is in the army. We used our savings to buy that house. What will happen to us?" Ethan looked into her tired eyes and saw the pain. He asked her to sit, offered her tea, and listened to her story. She talked about how hard they worked, how excited they were, and how now every night she couldn't sleep wondering if she'd be told to leave. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just nodded, listening quietly. When she finished, he said, "I never wanted this to happen. But it wasn't me who did this. It was Horizon who sold you a dream built on my family's land." Day changed something in Ethan. He started thinking deeply, not just as the heir of the trust, but as a human being. He went for a long walk across the edge of the neighborhood. He passed homes where children were playing in the yard. He saw people planting trees, walking dogs, living their lives without knowing the trap they were in. His heart hurt. Didn't want to destroy lives. He wanted to fix things, but in a way that was fair to him and to the people who were fooled by Horizon. Ethan and Claire sat down and talked for hours over the next few days. They discussed options. Claire said, "We can take everything. The law is completely on your side. But do you want that? Do you want to own 156 homes with 156 angry families?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I don't want that. But I don't want to be pushed aside either. This land has meaning. They have to respect that." So Claire prepared a proposal, a powerful one. Instead of evicting families or forcing everyone to pay him rent, Ethan would make a deal. He would allow the homeowners to stay without fear of being removed. But the Homeowners Association, the HOA that had been set up by Horizon, would be dissolved. Ethan would become the new authority. Any new decisions, any changes to the land would go through him. No. The people could live in peace, but they would know whose land they lived on. In return, Horizon would pay compensation, not just money, but an official apology and a public recognition of their mistake. It was a bold move, and not everyone liked it. Horizon's lawyers resisted at first. The homeowners were divided. Some supported Ethan, saying he was being fair. Others still called him a thief in disguise. But slowly, more people began to see the truth, realized Ethan wasn't the villain. He wasn't rich, didn't want to sell the land. He wanted respect, he wanted justice. A public meeting was held at a local school gymnasium. Hundreds of people came, homeowners, reporters, lawyers, officials. Ethan stood in front of them for the first time. He was nervous but calm, told the full story from the trust to the construction to the lawsuits. He explained what his family had, tried to protect. He didn't shout, didn't blame. He simply spoke from the heart. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then more. A woman in the crowd stood and said, "He's not trying to take our homes. He's trying to protect his." After that night, everything began to shift. Horizon accepted the proposal. The homeowners agreed to the new terms. The HOA was shut down. Ethan set up a new system, simple, fair, and based on respect for the land's history. The people kept their homes, their memories, their lives. But now, they also understood the ground they stood on wasn't just land. It was legacy. Ethan didn't become rich from the deal. He didn't want to. He used the compensation money too. Restore parts of his family's old homestead, rebuild the fences, and plant trees that his grandfather once spoke about. He still lived in his simple wooden house, still drank sweet tea on the porch with Max by his side. But now, when he looked out across the fields, he saw something new: people living, laughing, building futures, not stealing, not destroying, just living with a little more understanding of the past beneath their feet. But deep in the trust papers, one last secret remained. Something Claire had found but hadn't told Ethan yet. A final clause, a final twist, one that would change everything again, test Ethan in ways he never expected. The 100-year trap wasn't fully sprung yet. It still had one surprise left, and it was coming soon. Ethan Hale thought the battle was almost over. After months of legal fights, public protests, and endless meetings, he believed that things were settling down. The homeowners had agreed to his terms. The HOA was dissolved, and Horizon Development was forced to accept responsibility. People could live peacefully in the neighborhood, but under Ethan's watchful eye, it seemed like the story of the century-old family trust protecting the land had reached its final chapter. But deep inside the old papers, Ethan kept locked away. In a safe, there was still one more secret, a final clause that nobody had yet fully understood. This last part of the trust was buried at the very end of the document. It was written in a small, almost invisible handwriting, like someone had carefully hidden it for generations. Ethan's lawyer, Claire, was the first to spot it during a late-night reading session. She called Ethan immediately, her voice a mix of excitement and caution. "This is huge," she said. "Your great-great-grandfather didn't just protect the land itself. He protected everything on the land: houses, roads, fences, and even the money made from it. If anyone tries to profit from the land without your permission, you have the legal right to claim it all. It means the homes, the streets, the entire development, everything. Ethan stared at the paper. The idea was almost unbelievable. Could he really own not only the land, but also the 156 homes built on it? The community center? The playgrounds? The money from home sales and HOA fees? The clause stated that all improvements and profits would belong to the rightful heir. Automatically no exceptions. This was the real trap. Samuel Hale had planned for future generations, not just to reclaim the land, but to regain everything built on it if anyone tried to take advantage. It was a legal time bomb set 100 years ago. Ethan knew this was a powerful weapon, but also a huge responsibility. Owning 156 homes and thousands of dollars worth of property overnight was more than he ever dreamed. But it also meant his choices would affect hundreds of families who had nothing to do with Horizon's mistakes. He wanted to be fair, but firm. He called Claire to discuss what to do next. She explained the legal process to enforce the clause, which would require going back to court and possibly years of litigation. The homeowners might fight back, creating more tension. But Claire also reminded Ethan that this was his family's rightful property and legacy. After long nights of thinking, Ethan decided to take action not to cause harm, but to protect his family's name and ensure fairness. Claire filed a new legal claim to enforce the last clause of the trust. It was different from before. It was stronger, more comprehensive, and could change everything. The courtroom became even more crowded. Media vans arrived early. Reporters from all over wanted to cover the final showdown. Ethan felt the weight of history on his shoulders as he prepared to face the judge once more. During the trial, Ethan's lawyers laid out the entire story: the creation of the trust, the original intention of Samuel Hale, the illegal development, and now the final clause that protected every improvement made on the land. They argued that Horizon and anyone profiting from the homes were legally obligated to surrender everything to Ethan. Horizon's lawyers tried every defense, said the clause was outdated, unfair, and impossible to enforce. They claimed that homeowners were innocent parties who shouldn't lose their homes or investments. They even tried to argue that Ethan was trying to take advantage of a legal loophole for personal gain, but the judge listened carefully. After reviewing all evidence and legal precedents, the judge ruled in Ethan's favor. The trust's final clause was upheld as valid and enforceable. Ethan was declared the rightful owner of not only the land, but also the 156 homes, streets, the parks, and all profits made from the development. The courtroom erupted in shock. Horizon's CEO looked defeated. Homeowners were silent, unsure what this meant for their futures. News outlets called it the century-old legal victory and the man who owned a neighborhood. Ethan, however, remained calm. He knew this was only the beginning. Now he had to decide what to do with everything he legally owned. Instead of kicking people out or demanding huge payments, Ethan made a surprising decision. He announced he would allow the current homeowners to stay in their homes without additional costs or eviction. But he would take control of the neighborhood's governance, setting new rules based on respect, fairness, and community. He dissolved the old HOA and created a new management system that included homeowners in decision-making. He promised to maintain the land and protect its history. He also pledged to use part of the profits to improve local schools, parks, and community services. Many homeowners were relieved and grateful. They realized Ethan wasn't trying to punish them, but was protecting his family's legacy while helping build a better future for everyone. Over time, tensions eased, and the neighborhood began to heal. Ethan became a respected figure, a man who had stood firm against powerful developers and won. He remained humble, still living in his modest wooden house on the edge of town, walking the same land his ancestors had protected for over a century. But more than money or power, Ethan valued one thing above all: the trust and connection between people and the land beneath their feet. The 100-year trap had worked as planned, not just protecting property, but preserving a family's honor and history against the odds. and as the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, Ethan looked out over the neighborhood houses shining warmly. In the evening light, children playing safely, and trees swaying gently in the breeze, and knew that his great-great-grandfather's legacy was safe, for now and for generations to come.